My sister humiliated me at a family dinner, calling me a loser in front of her wealthy boyfriend despite me funding her entire lifestyle. Heartbroken, I silently cut her access to my bank account that night. When the rent payment bounced, her reality shattered. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The exhaustion was a physical weight, a heavy, wet wool blanket draped over my shoulders that I couldn't shake off no matter how many times I rolled my neck or stretched my back. My feet were throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache that pulsed in time with my heartbeat, a constant reminder of the double shift I had just pulled at the bistro. I smelled like stale coffee and sanitizer, a scent that had seeped into my pores over the last 4 years, branding me as the help even when I was out of uniform. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of my beat-up sedan. My eyes were rimmed with red, dark circles carved deep underneath them like bruises. I looked 10 years older than 32. I quickly applied a layer of concealer, trying to mask the fatigue, trying to look presentable for Catherine. Tonight was important. It was always important when it came to Catherine. She had just finished her first semester of grad school with top marks, a celebration dinner. I had transferred the money for the bill to her account earlier that morning, $500 I had scraped together from tips, and a freelance logo design project I had stayed up 3 nights in a row to finish. I was running on caffeine and the desperate hope that she would be happy, that she would smile at me with that bright, unburdened smile that made all the overtime worth it. I walked into the restaurant, a high-end Italian place with dim lighting and white tablecloths so crisp they looked like they could cut you. I felt immediately out of place in my department store dress and sensible shoes, clutching a purse that had seen better days. The hostess looked me up and down with a practiced, polite disdain before leading me to the private booth in the back. There they were, my parents looking uncomfortable in their Sunday best, and Catherine. She looked radiant, glowing with the kind of health and vitality that only money and lack of stress could buy, and next to her was Julian. I had met Julian once before, briefly. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a jawline that could cut glass and a suit that cost more than my car. He was the son of some real estate mogul, a connection Catherine had made at the university. He had his arm draped casually over the back of the booth, possessing the space, possessing her. "Fiona, you made it," Catherine said, her voice bright but lacking warmth. She didn't stand up to hug me. She just gestured vaguely to the empty seat across from them. "Happy celebration, Cat," I said, sliding into the booth. I tried to smile, but my face felt stiff. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks," she said, already turning her attention back to Julian. Julian was just telling Mom and Dad about his summer in Amalfi. I listened, nodding politely, taking small sips of water to fill my empty stomach. I was starving, but I didn't want to order much. Even though I had sent the money, I knew the bill would likely exceed it with the wine they were drinking, and I was terrified of the card being declined. The conversation drifted, as it always did lately, to ambition, to success. Julian spoke about mindsets and manifestation and how poverty was a state of mind. My father nodded along, intimidated, while my mother just smiled nervously. "It's really about who you surround yourself with," Julian said, swirling his red wine. He looked at me then, his eyes cold and assessing. "Don't you agree, Fiona? You're in service, right?" "I'm a graphic designer," I corrected quietly, my hand tightening around my water glass. "But I pick up shifts at a bistro to make ends meet." Julian smirked, a small dismissive twitch of his lips. "Right, the hustle." Catherine laughed then. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Julian, don't mind her. Fiona is practically married to that apron. She loves the grind. Some people just don't have the vision for more, you know." I froze. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to drop away. "Excuse me." Catherine took a sip of her wine, her eyes locking with mine. There was a challenge there, a hardness I hadn't seen before. "I'm just saying, Fi, you're 32. You're still working hourly jobs. You're always tired, always complaining about bills. It's a choice at this point. You're kind of a loser if we're being honest. You just don't have the drive to be on our level." The table went silent. My mother gasped softly, putting a hand to her mouth. My father looked down at his plate. "A loser," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's true," Catherine shrugged, leaning into Julian, who looked amused. "I mean, look at you. You look like you just rolled out of a dumpster. It's embarrassing to be seen with you. Julian is introducing me to important people, Fiona. I can't have you dragging me down with your mediocrity." My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic rhythm. I looked at my sister, the girl I had carried on my back for 6 years, the girl whose rent I paid, whose tuition I paid, whose designer dress she was wearing right now I had paid for. The betrayal hit me harder than the exhaustion. It wasn't just an insult, it was an erasure. She had erased every sacrifice, every double shift, every skipped meal I had endured to put her in that chair. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a terminal diagnosis for our relationship, delivered between sips of vintage Merlot. The silence that followed her declaration was deafening. It stretched out, thick and suffocating, filling the space between us. I waited for my parents to speak up. I waited for my dad to slam his hand on the table and tell her to apologize. I waited for my mom to remind Catherine that the only reason she was sitting there, debt-free and draped in silk, was because of me. But they didn't. My father cleared his throat awkwardly and took a drink of his water. My mother reached out and touched Catherine's arm gently, but she didn't scold her. She just said, "Oh, Kathy, don't be so harsh." Harsh, not wrong, not cruel, just harsh. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, starting at my heart and radiating outward until my fingertips felt numb. It was a clarity I had never experienced before. It was as if the emotional fog of familial duty had instantly evaporated, leaving behind a stark, jagged landscape of reality. "I see," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, low and calm. It didn't sound like my voice. It sounded like a stranger's. "So, I'm a loser, and I'm embarrassing you." "Don't be dramatic, Fiona," Catherine sighed, rolling her eyes. She picked up a piece of calamari. "I'm just trying to help you. Julian says that you need to cut off dead weight to fly. Maybe if you realized how pathetic your situation is, you'd actually do something about it. Stop playing the victim." "The victim," I echoed. I looked at Julian. He was watching me with a smug satisfaction, like he was watching a bug being crushed under a boot. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed isolating her, turning her against her roots. He whispered something in her ear, and she giggled, a sound that twisted my stomach into knots. "I'm not feeling well," I said, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor, drawing looks from nearby tables. "I'm going to head home." "Run away, then," Catherine said, not even looking up. "Just make sure you transfer the rent money for next month before you go to sleep. I need to buy some books tomorrow." The audacity was breathtaking. It was a physical blow. She just called me a loser, a dead weight, and in the same breath demanded my money. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly. "Good night, Mom, Dad." They wouldn't meet my eyes. "Drive safe, honey," my mom whispered, terrified of causing a scene. I walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I walked through the cool night air to my rusted sedan, the one with the check engine light that had been on for 6 months because I couldn't afford the mechanic. I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears didn't come. Instead, a burning, white-hot rage ignited in my gut. It swirled with the exhaustion, creating a potent, dangerous cocktail of adrenaline. I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of the tires on the pavement and the replay of her voice in my head. "You're kind of a loser. You look like you rolled out of a dumpster." When I got to my small, studio apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the drafty window, I sat on the edge of my bed. I pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app. There it was, the joint account. Catherine's Future, I had named it. I scrolled through the transaction history. $2,400 luxury apartments management, $350 university bookstore, $1,200 tuition installment, $150 Sephora, $80 sushi bistro. I looked at my own checking account, $412. I had lived on instant noodles and toast for 3 weeks so she could have sushi. I had worn shoes with holes in the soles so she could buy makeup. I had worked 60-hour weeks, ruining my back and my eyes, so she could focus on her studies without the burden of a job. My phone buzzed, a text from Catherine. "Kat, don't be mad. You know I'm just stressed. Seriously, though, don't forget the transfer. Julian and I are looking at a weekend trip to Napa and I need cash." I stared at the screen. She didn't even apologize. She just doubled down. She truly believed she was entitled to my lifeblood. She thought I was a resource, a faucet she could turn on and off. She thought I was too weak, too desperate for her love to ever say no. I looked at the transfer button. She thought she was untouchable because she had Julian and his mindset. She thought she was better than me because she sat in a classroom while I stood behind a bar. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just the bank, I was the signatory. To understand why that night broke me, you have to understand what I gave up. 6 years ago, our parents lost everything in the housing crash. Dad's pension, the house, the savings, gone. Catherine was 18, bright-eyed, and accepted into her dream university. I was 26, just starting to gain traction in my design career. I saw the fear in her eyes when Dad told her there was no money for college. I saw her future crumbling. So I stepped up. I made a promise. "I've got you," I told her. "You go to school, I'll handle the rest." I didn't just handle it, I buried myself for it. I took a second job waiting tables at a high-volume sports bar. I worked days at the agency and nights at the bar. I missed my best friend's wedding because I couldn't afford the time off. I dated no one because I had no time and no money for dates. I lived in a shoebox apartment in a bad neighborhood so I could pay for her safe, secure condo near campus. I did it because I loved her. I did it because I wanted her to have the life I couldn't have. I was her sister, her protector, her safety net. And for a long time, she was grateful. Or at least, she pretended to be. Then came Julian. Julian appeared 3 months ago. He was a consultant regarding venture capital, or so he claimed. He was 28, drove a leased Porsche, and spoke exclusively in buzzwords. He came from old money, or at least, his family did, and he viewed anyone who actually worked for a living as a failure of imagination. The first time I met him, he asked me how much I made in a year. When I deflected, he laughed and said, "That's cute, that's my monthly allowance." I saw the way he looked at Catherine, like she was an accessory, and I saw the way he looked at me, like I was the help. But the worst part was watching Catherine morph into him. She started criticizing my clothes. She started making fun of our parents' small rental house. She started using words like equity and leverage without knowing what they meant. Julian was the architect of this new Catherine. He was the one whispering in her ear that she deserved the best, that she was special, that the people around her were dragging her down. He was isolating her, feeding her ego while detaching her from reality. He was a predator in a tailored suit. He didn't love her. He loved having a pretty girl who hung on his every word. And he especially loved the fact that she had money to spend, money he assumed came from family wealth, not realizing it came from her sister's sweat and tears. He was influencing her to hate me, likely because he sensed that I was the only one who saw through him. I saw the way his eyes lingered on the bill when it came, waiting for someone else to grab it. I saw the vague answers he gave when asked about his actual job. He was a fraud, and he had turned my sister into a monster. I sat on my bed, the phone screen dimming in my hand. I thought about the text message, "Need cash for Napa." I thought about the night I fainted at the bar from dehydration, because I hadn't stopped running for 8 hours. I thought about the time I had to sell my grandmother's locket to cover her sorority dues because she was crying about being left out. I looked at the banking app again. I wasn't just a sister anymore, I was a creditor, and my client had just defaulted on the loan of a lifetime. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't call my parents to cry. Instead, I opened my laptop. I logged into the bank's main portal. I navigated to the scheduled transfers section. Monthly rent, $2,400 active. Tuition autopay, $1,200 active. Weekly allowance, $300 active. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Julian wanted to talk about cutting dead weight. He wanted to talk about mindset. Fine. Let's see how his mindset handles an eviction notice. I clicked cancel, then confirm. Then, I went to the account access settings. Authorized user, Catherine. I clicked remove. The screen refreshed, processing. Success, user Catherine has been removed. I closed the laptop. For the first time in 6 years, I laid back on my pillows and didn't worry about the next shift. I didn't worry about the overtime. I slept like a baby. The morning after the dinner, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Silence. Usually, my mornings were a frantic race against the clock, checking emails for freelance edits, coordinate. Ting Catherine's schedule, ensuring my main job tasks were queued up, and mentally prepping for the night shift. But today, the silence was heavy, pregnant with the storm I knew was coming. I lay in bed for 20 minutes just staring at the water stain on my ceiling, tracing its outline. It looked like a cloud, or maybe an anvil. I made coffee, I drank it slowly. I didn't check my phone. When I finally turned it on around 10:00 a.m., the notifications cascaded in like a digital avalanche. Missed calls from Catherine, texts from Catherine, a few confused texts from my mother asking if I was okay. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the one notification that mattered. An automated email from the bank, scheduled transfer failed, insufficient authorization. A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. It had begun. I went to my desk, a small, cramped corner of my studio where I did my freelance work, and opened my laptop. It was time to assess the battlefield. I wasn't just a sister anymore. I was a strategist dismantling a parasitic organization. First, the apartment. I called Mr. Henderson, the landlord of the luxury complex where Catherine lived. He was a sweet, older man who had always liked me because I paid the rent 3 days early, every single month for 3 years. "Fiona," he answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "I was just about to call you. There seems to be a glitch with the autopay for Unit 4B, it bounced this morning." "It wasn't a glitch, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was thumping against my ribs. "I canceled the payment." There was a pause. "Oh, is everything all right?" "I'm no longer financing the tenant in Unit 4B, I said formally. "As the leaseholder, I'm giving you notice. I will be terminating the lease at the end of this billing cycle. I'm willing to pay the penalty fee for breaking the contract early." "Fiona," he sounded concerned. "You know that means Catherine will have to vacate in 30 days. Does she know?" "She will soon," I said. "Mr. Henderson, if she tries to contact you, please direct her to me. Do not accept partial payment from her. The lease is in my name, and I am closing it." "I understand," he said, his tone shifting to professional neutrality. "I'll draw up the papers. You're a good girl, Fiona. I hope you're okay." "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I replied. I hung up. Step 1 complete. The roof over her head was now a ticking clock. Next, the consultant. I opened a new browser window. Julian, the man who mocked my hustle. The man who claimed to be a venture capitalist titan. I knew his first name and the general area his family was supposedly from, some enclave of wealth in Connecticut. I knew he claimed to be an investor. I started digging. I used the tools of my trade, advanced search operators, public record databases, and social media archives. As a graphic designer, I often had to research clients to ensure they were legitimate before taking on large contracts. I knew how to find digital footprints that people thought they had scrubbed. I searched for Julian Vane. I remembered his last name from the reservation at the restaurant. LinkedIn, Julian Vane, visionary, angel investor, blockchain enthusiast. It was a profile filled with buzzwords but devoid of substance. No specific companies listed, just self-employed and consultant. I dug deeper. I checked the business license database for the state. No LLCs registered under his name, no corporations. I checked the court records in the county where he claimed to live. Nothing. Then I expanded the search to his supposed hometown in Connecticut, and there it was, a small, ugly breadcrumb trail. A speeding ticket from 3 years ago, but the vehicle listed wasn't a Porsche. It was a 2012 Honda Civic. The address listed wasn't a mansion. It was a unit in a garden-style apartment complex near a community college. I kept digging. I found an old Facebook profile he had abandoned under the name Jules Vane. The photos were telling: no Amalfi Coast, no private jets, just pictures of him at keg parties, working at a car rental agency, and reposting get-rich-quick seminar videos. Then I found the smoking gun, a forum post on a watchdog site for fake gurus. A user had posted a warning 6 months ago: watch out for a guy named Julian in the city. Claims to be old money, tries to get girls to take out loans for his investment opportunities. He's a grifter. His dad isn't a mogul. He manages a hardware store in Hartford. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. He wasn't rich. He was broke. He was projecting an image of wealth to prey on insecure, ambitious girls like Catherine. He was likely living off her, or rather, living off me, while pretending to be her benefactor. He called me a loser. He called me dead weight. I took a screenshot, then another. I started a folder on my desktop named The Reset. I wasn't just going to cut them off. I was going to expose them. The explosion happened at 2:15 p.m. I was at the bistro, prepping the bar for the early dinner rush. I was slicing limes, the sharp citrus scent filling the air, when my phone, which I had left on the counter, lit up. Catherine calling. It rang and rang and rang. I let it go to voicemail. 2 seconds later, Catherine calling. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I needed to be the rock that the wave broke against. Hello. Fiona, her voice was a shriek, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She sounded hysterical, breathless. What the hell is going on? My card was declined. I'm at the Apple store. I'm trying to buy the new iPad for class, and the guy said insufficient funds in front of everyone. I know, I said calmly. I canceled the transfer. You what? Her voice dropped an octave, trembling with shock. What do you mean you canceled it? Fix it. Fix it right now. There's a line behind me, Fiona. You are embarrassing me. I'm embarrassing you? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. Strange. Last night you said I was the embarrassment. You said I was a loser. You said I needed to realize how pathetic my situation was. Oh my God, are you seriously doing this right now? She screamed. Are you being this petty over a joke? I was drunk. Julian was just playing around. You can't just cut off my money because your feelings are hurt. It's not your money, Catherine, I said, enunciating every word. It's my money. The money I make scrubbing tables and designing logos until 3:00 a.m. And you're right. I realized how pathetic my situation was. My situation was paying for a sister who despises me. Fiona, stop it. Transfer the money. Julian is waiting for me. Let Julian pay for it, I said. He's the millionaire, right? He's the one with the vision. Surely $1,000 for an iPad is pocket change for a Vane. There was a silence on the other end, a thick, panicked silence. He left his wallet in the car, Catherine stammered. Of course he did, I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Catherine, listen to me closely. The account is closed. The credit card is canceled. And I spoke to Mr. Henderson this morning. I'm terminating the lease on the apartment. You can't do that, she wailed. That's my home. Where am I supposed to go? You have 30 days. I suggest you ask Julian. Or maybe you can manifest a new apartment. There was a scuffling sound, and then a deeper, angry voice came on the line. Listen here, Fiona. It was Julian. The smooth, cultured accent was gone, replaced by a rougher, aggressive tone. You think you're being smart, but you're making a big mistake. You don't know who you're messing with. My family lawyers will have a field day with you. This is financial abuse. Financial abuse? I leaned against the bar, twirling a paring knife on the cutting board. Cutting off a 24-year-old adult from my personal bank account. Go ahead, Julian. Call your family lawyers. What's the firm's name? Is it imaginary, like your trust fund? Excuse me, he sounded rattled. I know who you are, Julian, I lied. Well, half-lied. I knew enough to bluff. I know about the hardware store in Hartford. I know about the rental car agency. I know you're not an investor. You're crazy, he spat, but his voice cracked. You're a jealous, bitter old maid who can't stand to see her sister succeed. And you're a con artist driving a leased car you can probably barely afford, I countered. Here is the reality check. The tap is dry. The Bank of Fiona is closed permanently. If you really love her, you support her. But we both know you won't because you're broke. You will regret this, he threatened. I'm going to ruin you. You can't ruin someone who has nothing left to lose, I said. Put my sister back on. She doesn't want to talk to you, he sneered. We're done with you. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had done it. I had severed the limb to save the body. I looked up and saw my manager, Dave, watching me with concern. Everything okay, Fi? Yeah, Dave, I said, pocketing my phone. I just quit my third job. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Julian and Catherine wouldn't just walk away, they would scramble to regain control of the narrative. They needed a villain to explain their sudden financial collapse, and I was the perfect candidate. 2 days later, the flying monkeys arrived. My mother called me in the middle of a client meeting. Then my father. Then my aunt. I let them all go to voicemail until I was home, sitting in my sanctuary of a studio, armed with a glass of wine and my laptop. I called my mom back. Fiona Marie, she was crying. I could hear the jagged intake of her breath. How could you be so cruel? Catherine is distraught. She says you cut her off because you were jealous of Julian hitting on her. I nearly choked on my wine. What? She was here for hours today, Mom sobbed. She said you've been stealing from the account meant for her tuition. She said you threatened to make her homeless because you wanted Julian and he turned you down. Fiona, tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't steal her school money. The brilliance of the lie was sickening. They had taken the truth, that I controlled the money and twisted it into embezzlement. They knew my parents didn't understand how the accounts were set up. They knew my parents were soft, easily manipulated by tears, and Catherine was a master performer. Mom, I said, my voice hard, stop crying and listen. Who put the money in that account? Well, we thought, you were managing the inheritance fund. There is no inheritance fund, Mom, I shouted, losing my composure for the first time. Dad's pension is gone. The money in that account was my paycheck. Every dollar she spent on sushi, on clothes, on that apartment, it was money I earned waiting tables. But, Julian said. Julian is a liar, I cut her off. Mom, Catherine is lying to you to cover up the fact that she's been bleeding me dry. Did she ask you for money? My mother went silent. She needs a deposit for a new place. She said she's unsafe because you gave her keys to some strangers. I gave notice to the landlord. I rubbed my temples. She asked you for money, didn't she? How much? Your father gave her $5,000, Mom whispered. It was our emergency savings. I closed my eyes. The rage that filled me was cold, absolute and terrifying. Julian had pivoted. When I cut off the supply, he didn't leave, he just moved to the next available host. He was draining my aging parents now. He was taking their safety net, their medical emergency fund, to maintain his facade. "Mom," I said, my voice deadly calm, "do not give her another cent, do you hear me?" "But she's your sister." "I am coming over on Sunday for the barbecue," I said, "and I am going to show you everything. Tell Catherine to be there, tell Julian to be there, tell them I want to apologize." "Oh, good," Mom sounded relieved, completely missing the tone of my voice. "Yes, we need to heal this family. I knew you would do the right thing." "I am going to do the right thing," I promised. I hung up. I had 3 days until Sunday. I needed to build a case so watertight that even my denial-ridden parents couldn't ignore it. I needed to destroy Julian completely. I went back to my receipts folder. It wasn't enough to just know he was a fraud. I needed to prove he was dangerous. I paid for a background check service, the expensive kind used by private investigators. I ran Julian Vane again, but this time I used the address I found on the traffic ticket. The results populated. Julian Vane, aka Julian Vance. Civil judgments, 3 defaulted loans, $45,000. Restraining order, filed 2022, dismissed. He had changed 1 letter of his last name. Just enough to obscure the search results for a casual Googler, but not enough to hide from a deep dive. I found the lawsuits. 1 was from a credit union, 2 were from individuals' women, small claims court, unpaid personal loans. I managed to find one of the women on Instagram. I sent a DM. "Hi, I think I'm dealing with Julian Vance. He's dating my sister. Did he tell you he was an investor?" She replied within an hour. "Run. He got me to take out a personal loan for a crypto startup and vanished. He's a leech." I took screenshots. Then, I downloaded every single bank statement from the last 4 years. I highlighted every transfer from my personal account to the joint account. I highlighted every purchase Catherine made. Gucci, Prada, the Ritz-Carlton. I printed it all out. I went to Kinko S. I bought a binder, a red one. I organized the sections. The source of funds, my pay stubs matching the transfers to her. The expenditures, her luxury spending versus my grocery bills. The Julian file, the court records, the traffic tickets, the DM from his ex-victim, the forum posts exposing him. The lease, the document showing I was the sole financial guarantor. I placed the binder in my bag. It weighed about 3 pounds. It felt like a weapon. They wanted to paint me as the jealous, petty sister. They wanted to take my parents' last dime. I was about to turn their family barbecue into a funeral for their lies. The family barbecue was an annual tradition held in my aunt's backyard, a sprawling lawn that had hosted every birthday and graduation for the last 20 years. Today, the air smelled of charcoal and sweet marinades, a nostalgic scent that usually brought me comfort. Today, it smelled like a battlefield. I arrived late. I wanted everyone to be there. I wanted the audience seated. When I walked through the side gate, the chatter died d. Own, my aunt, uncle, 2 cousins, my parents, Catherine and Julian were all seated around the patio table. They looked up at me with varying expressions. My parents looked hopeful, my aunt looked judgmental, and Catherine and Julian looked smug. Catherine was wearing a new dress. I recognized the brand. It cost at least $300. Paid for, no doubt, by my father's emergency fund. Fiona, my dad stood up, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Glad you made it. Come, grab a plate." "I'm not hungry, Dad," I said, walking to the head of the table. I didn't sit down. I placed the red binder on the glass tabletop with a heavy thud. "We were just talking about how you were going to apologize," Catherine said, sipping her iced tea. She looked at Julian, who gave her an encouraging nod. "About how you've been confused." "I am confused about one thing," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the yard. I'm confused as to why Julian Vance is sitting at this table eating my father's food when he owes $45,000 to 3 different creditors. The silence that fell was instant and absolute. Julian froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me." "Julian Vance," I repeated. "Not Vane. You changed your name on social media, but you forgot to change it on your civil court judgments." I opened the binder. I didn't hand it to my parents. I opened it to the page with the court documents and held it up. "3 judgments," I read aloud. "1 from a credit card company, 2 from women you dated. Unpaid personal loans. Is that your investment strategy, Julian? Dating women and stealing their credit?" "This is ridiculous." Julian stood up, his face flushing red. These are forged. Who do you think you are?" "Sit down," I snapped. It was the first time I had ever raised my voice at a family gathering. The authority in my tone shocked him into a momentary pause. I turned to my parents. "Mom, Dad, you think I stole Catherine's money? Look at this." I flipped to the first section, source of funds. "This is my pay stub from the bistro. Date, March 12th. Amount, $1,200. This is the deposit into Catherine's account. Date, March 13th. Amount, $1,200. I flipped the page. April, May, June, every single month for 4 years. Look at the names on the transfers. Fiona, Fiona, Fiona. My mother stood up, her hands trembling as she looked at the pages. She saw the numbers. She saw the truth in black and white. "Now let's look at what she spent it on," I continued, flipping to the expenditures section. While I was eating instant ramen, Catherine spent $300 at Sephora. While I was driving a car with no AC, she spent $400 on a spa day. I looked at Catherine. Her smugness was gone. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open. And finally, I turned to the last page, the screenshot of the DM from Julian's ex-girlfriend. This is from a woman named Sarah. She says Julian convinced her to take out a loan for a crypto startup and then vanished. "Does that sound familiar, Mom? Did Catherine ask you for money for a deposit?" My father turned slowly to look at Julian. My father was a quiet man, a gentle man, but he had worked in a factory for 30 years to build what little he had. He knew the look of a con man. "Is this true?" Dad asked, his voice low. "Mr. Davis, please," Julian stammered, holding up his hands. "Fiona is clearly mentally unstable. She's doctored these documents. I'm a venture capitalist." "What's the name of your firm?" I challenged. "What's your EIN? What's your business address? Because the state of Connecticut has no record of you." Julian looked around the table. He saw the doubt in my uncle's eyes. He saw the horror in my mother's. He saw the game was over. "You're all crazy," Julian sneered, throwing his napkin on the table. "I don't need this. I have investors waiting for me in the city." He turned to Catherine. "Come on, Kat, we're leaving." Catherine sat there, frozen. She looked at the binder. She looked at me. Then she looked at Julian, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time seeing the sweat on his brow, the cheapness of his suit, the panic in his eyes. "You said you were paying for the Napa trip," she whispered, "but you asked me to put the deposit on my card." "It was a liquidity issue," Julian shouted. "God, are you stupid? Come on." He reached out to grab her arm. "Don't touch her," my father boomed. He stepped between them, his chest heaving. "Get off my property, now." Julian sneered, adjusted his jacket, and spat on the grass. "Fine, good luck with your loser daughter." He stormed out of the gate. The latch clicked shut behind him. Catherine sat alone at the table. The silence was heavy, broken only by the chirping of crickets. She looked small. She looked young. He lied," she whispered, looking at me. "He lied about everything," I said, closing the binder. "But so did you, Catherine. You lied to Mom and Dad about me. You called me a thief." She burst into tears, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to be someone. He made me feel special." I looked at her and I felt nothing. The anger was gone, but the love hadn't returned yet. It was just a hollow space where my sister used to be. "I'm leaving," I said to my parents. "I suggest you check your bank accounts and change your passwords. And Catherine, the eviction notice stands. You have 27 days." The fallout was swift and brutal. My parents, to their credit, apologized profusely. They were horrified at how easily they had been duped, ashamed that they had believed the worst of me. They offered to pay me back the money they had given Catherine, but I refused. They needed it more than I did. Catherine was forced to move back home into her childhood bedroom. The humiliation of losing her luxury apartment and her wealthy boyfriend broke her. She dropped out of grad school for a semester, unable to face the reality of her situation. She got a job, a real job. She's working as a receptionist at a dental office. We didn't speak for 3 months. When we finally did, it was because she showed up at my door with an envelope. Inside was $300. "It's not much," she said, looking at her shoes. She looked different, tired, humbled. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. "But it's my first paycheck. I want to start paying you back." I looked at the money. It was a drop in the ocean of what I had spent, but the gesture was monumental. "Thank you," I said. "I was awful," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was so insecure and he fed on it. I treated you like dirt and you were the only one holding me up." "Yes, you did," I said, "and yes, I was." We aren't best friends again. Not yet. Trust takes years to build and seconds to break, and we are still in the construction phase. But she is learning the value of $1, and more importantly, the value of loyalty. As for Julian, my background check wasn't just for show. I forwarded the information about his fake investments to the State Attorney General's Fraud Division. Last I heard, he was facing charges for soliciting investments without a license and fraud. He wasn't living in a penthouse, he was likely looking at a cell. And me. I finally quit the bistro. With Catherine off my payroll, my design income was more than enough to support myself. I moved into a nicer apartment, one with a balcony and no water stains. I started taking weekends off. I started dating. I bought myself a new dress. Not for a party, not for anyone else, just for me. Sometimes, the best investment you can make is in yourself. And the highest return comes when you finally cut your losses.